My name is Carol Thompson, I'm 72 years old, and my own children hired an electrician to fix the lights, but what he found was their plot to end my life. Before I tell you about how a stranger's chilling whisper saved me from a death trap set by my own flesh and blood, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It all started on a Tuesday morning, one of those gray, unremarkable Ohio days where the sky feels heavy enough to touch. I was standing in my kitchen, the same kitchen I'd stood in for nearly 50 years, watching a man named Frank Miller wipe his hands on a dusty rag. My son David had sent him over. "He's the best, Mom," he'd said over the phone, his voice a little too cheerful. "He'll figure out why those lights keep flickering." Frank had been here for less than an hour. He'd gone down into the damp, musty basement, and when he came back up the creaking wooden stairs, he was a different man. The friendly professional smile he'd worn earlier was gone. His face was pale, drained of all color, and his eyes darted around the kitchen as if he was looking for listening ears in the walls. He walked right past me, pretending to check the light fixture over the sink. My daughter Sarah was in the living room, supposedly reading a magazine, but I knew she was listening. Frank fiddled with the fixture for a moment, then he turned, his back to the living room, and walked slowly towards me. He leaned in close, so close I could smell the faint scent of oil and metal on his work shirt. His voice was a low, urgent whisper, barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. "Mrs. Thompson," he breathed, his eyes locking onto mine. "Listen to me very, very carefully. I want you to get your purse, your car keys, and any important papers you can grab without making a scene. Walk out of this house right now. Don't look back and don't, under any circumstances, tell your children anything." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled back a step, my hand flying to my chest. My heart, which had been beating a slow, steady rhythm just moments before, began to hammer against my ribs like a trapped bird. What are you talking about?" I whispered back, my voice trembling. "It's just the lights. The wiring is old." Frank shook his head slowly, a grim finality in his expression. He glanced towards the basement door, then back at me. "Ma'am," he said, his voice even lower, "whatever your children installed down there, it wasn't meant to fix your lights. It was meant to turn them out. Permanently. Permanently." The word hung in the air between us, thick and poisonous. The floral pattern on the kitchen wallpaper seemed to swim before my eyes. A roaring started in my ears, drowning out the familiar sounds of my home. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, the gentle hum of the fridge. All I could hear was that one terrible word. My children. David and Sarah. My babies. The ones I had rocked to sleep in this very house. The ones whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose tears I had wiped away. They were trying to. The thought was so monstrous, so utterly impossible, that my mind refused to form it completely. This had to be a mistake. A terrible, cruel misunderstanding. This stranger was crazy. He had to be. But then I looked into his eyes again. There was no madness there. Only a deep, chilling seriousness. The look of a man who had seen something horrible and was now trying to save a life. My life. Why? I managed to choke out, the single word feeling like broken glass in my throat. He didn't answer right away. He just held my gaze, his own eyes filled with a kind of pity that made my stomach clench. He didn't need to answer. I knew why. The inheritance. The farmhouse sitting on acres of prime Ohio land. The life insurance policy my late husband, Michael, had left behind to make sure I was taken care of. It was always about the money. My body felt like it was made of lead. Every instinct I had as a mother screamed that this was impossible, a lie. But another deeper instinct, the instinct for survival, was screaming even louder. It was telling me that this man was telling the truth. He saw the war happening on my face. "There's no time, Carol," he said, using my first name, the urgency cutting through my shock. "We have to go. Now." I stood there, frozen in the middle of my own kitchen. A stranger on one side and the horrifying truth on the other. A million memories flashed through my mind. David's first steps on this very floor. Sarah's laughter echoing from the backyard. How could it have come to this? What had I done wrong? The choice was impossible. Trust the man who had been in my house for an hour, or trust the children I had spent my entire life loving. My hand trembled as I lifted it, my gaze fixed on the basement door. What was really down there? What terrible secret was hidden in the foundation of my home, waiting in the dark? I opened my mouth to speak, to ask him, to tell him. Before that horrifying moment in the kitchen, before a stranger's words shattered my world, life had a quiet, predictable rhythm. My farmhouse, nestled in the rolling green hills of rural Ohio, was more than just wood and nails. It was a living scrapbook of my life with Michael. He had passed 3 years ago, and the silence he left behind was a physical presence in every room. I'd wake up each morning to the soft light filtering through the lace curtains he'd helped me hang, make my coffee in the pot we'd received as a wedding gift, and sit at the worn oak table where his laughter still seemed to echo. I filled my days with small rituals, tending to my roses, polishing the silver, reading novels in the worn armchair by the fire. It was a lonely life, but it was mine. My children, I thought, were my connection to the world, my reason for keeping on. David, my eldest at 45, was a real estate agent with a smile that could sell a house in a blizzard and a lifestyle that always seemed one step ahead of his salary. He and his wife Linda would visit on Sundays. Linda was a woman who was always perfectly put together, from her manicured nails to her saccharine sweet compliments. She'd call me Mom, but the word never sounded right coming from her lips. There was a coolness in her eyes, a calculating glint that I'd always tried to ignore. I told myself I was just being an overprotective mother. Then there was Sarah, my daughter, 42. She'd always been the more sensitive one, the artist. Her recent divorce had hit her hard, and 6 months ago, she had moved back into her old childhood bedroom. She'd lost her spark. Most days she'd drift through the house like a ghost, her face pale, her eyes shadowed with a sadness she refused to talk about. When I'd try to hug her, she'd stiffen, a silent rejection that hurt more than any angry word. I thought she just needed time to heal from the pain of her failed marriage. I wanted to give her a safe harbor, a place to mend her broken heart. My home was her home always. The cracks started small, almost too small to notice. A bill I was sure I'd left on the hall table would turn up in a different drawer. A delicate porcelain bird, a gift from my own mother, vanished from the mantelpiece. When I asked, Sarah would just shrug. "I haven't seen it, Mom. You've been so forgetful lately." David would echo her. "You need to take it easy, Mom. You're not as young as you used to be." They'd say it with such concern, such loving care, that I started to believe them. Maybe I was getting forgetful. Maybe I was losing my grip. Then came the physical symptoms. A dizzy spell in the garden that left me clinging to a rose trellis, the world spinning around me. Waking up in the middle of the night with my heart racing, pounding a frantic, irregular rhythm against my ribs. A constant, bone-deep fatigue that no amount of sleep could fix. My doctor ran tests, but everything came back normal. "You're in remarkable health for a woman of 72, he'd said, patting my hand. "It's probably just stress and age." I accepted it. What else could I do? I was getting old. This is what getting old felt like. My children were right. They were just looking out for me. They loved me. But then the humming started. It was a low, almost imperceptible vibration, coming from somewhere deep within the kitchen wall. At first I thought it was the old refrigerator, but it was a different kind of sound. A steady electronic thrum that seemed to make my teeth ache. I mentioned it to David during one of his visits. He'd exchanged a quick, unreadable glance with Linda before laughing it off. "It's just the old wiring, Mom. This house is ancient." The way he said it, with a dismissive wave of his hand, made me feel foolish for even bringing it up. But the humming continued. A sinister secret whispered from behind the wallpaper. It was the soundtrack to my decline, and I, in my trusting foolishness, never once suspected it was anything but the house settling into its old age, just like me. I was wrong. I was so terribly wrong. The turning point, the moment the mask of loving concern truly began to slip, came on a Thursday afternoon in late September. The autumn leaves were just starting to turn, painting the trees outside my window in fiery shades of red and gold. I was in the kitchen, kneading dough for a loaf of bread, when David's car pulled into the driveway, followed closely by Sarah's. It was unusual for them to visit on a weekday, and together no less. A little flutter of unease started in my stomach. They didn't come alone. Trailing behind them was a man I'd never seen before. He was young, probably in his early 30s, wearing a suit that looked too expensive for our dusty country roads. He carried a sleek leather briefcase and had a smile that was all teeth. "Mom," David said, kissing my cheek with a little too much enthusiasm. "This is Mr. Harrison. He's a financial advisor. A friend of a friend. He was in the area and we thought he could, have a chat with you." Sarah hung back by the door, avoiding my eyes, twisting a loose thread on her sweater. Mr. Harrison stepped forward and shook my flour-dusted hand. His own was cold and clammy. "A pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Thompson," he said smoothly. "David and Sarah have told me so much about you. They're just so devoted." We all sat down at the kitchen table, the very table where I had once helped them with their homework. The air grew thick with a tension I couldn't name. David cleared his throat. "Mom, we've been worried about you," he began, his voice taking on that gentle, patronizing tone he used when he thought I was being difficult. "You've been forgetting things. You seem tired all the time. Sarah and we just want to help take some of the burden off your shoulders." Mr. Harrison opened his briefcase with a soft click. He slid a thick stack of papers across the table towards me. The top page was titled "Durable Power of Attorney." My blood ran cold. "It's just a formality, Mom," Sarah chimed in, her voice unnaturally high. "It would just allow David to help you with the bills, manage the estate, things like that. So you don't have to worry about it anymore." Manage the estate. The words were a slap in the face. My husband Michael had worked his fingers to the bone for this farm. We had built this life together piece by piece. The idea of handing control over to anyone, even my own son, felt like a betrayal of his memory. I looked at the papers, then at my children. I saw the greed flickering in David's eyes, the desperate impatience. I saw the sullen resentment in Sarah's posture. This wasn't about helping me. This was about control. This was about my money, my land, my inheritance. "No," I said. My voice was quiet, but it was firm. David's smile vanished. "What do you mean, no?" "Mom, this is for your own good. I am perfectly capable of managing my own affairs," I said, pushing the papers back across the table. "I don't need any help." Mr. Harrison's professional demeanor faltered. He looked at David, a silent question in his eyes. That's when David's temper snapped. He slammed his hand down on the table, making the salt and pepper shakers jump. "For your own good? Don't you see what's happening? You're losing it, Mom. You're becoming a liability. We're trying to protect you, protect Dad's legacy, and you're being stubborn and paranoid." His words were like stones, each one striking a fresh wound. Paranoid. A liability. Was that what I was to him now? Not his mother, but a problem to be managed? "Get out," I whispered, my whole body trembling with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. "What?" he snarled. "Get out of my house," I repeated, louder this time, finding a strength I didn't know I possessed. "Both of you. And take your lawyer with you." David's face was a mask of fury. He stood up so abruptly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. Sarah finally looked at me, her eyes cold and empty. There was no sympathy in them, only annoyance. They turned and walked out without another word, Mr. Harrison scurrying behind them like a rat. I stood there alone in my kitchen, the scent of their expensive cologne and betrayal hanging heavy in the air. That night, as I lay in bed, unable to sleep, the humming in the walls seemed louder than ever. It was no longer a gentle thrum. It felt aggressive, malicious. It felt like the house itself was turning against me, and I was utterly, completely alone. In the weeks that followed the disastrous meeting about the power of attorney, the atmosphere in the house grew colder, and my health took a nosedive. The humming in the wall became a constant, maddening companion, and the lights began to flicker erratically, sometimes dimming so low I could barely see, other times flaring up with a startling brightness. My children's visits became less frequent, their phone calls shorter, filled with a strained, artificial politeness that was worse than their anger. They were waiting. I could feel it. They were waiting for me to break. I knew I needed to get the wiring checked. It was more than just an annoyance. It felt dangerous. I picked up the phone one morning, my mind set on calling Johnson Electric, the same family-owned company that had serviced our house for 30 years. But as my finger hovered over the keypad, David called me, as if he had a sixth sense. "Hey Mom, just checking in," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "How are you feeling?" "The lights are getting worse, David," I told him, my voice flat. "I'm calling an electrician." There was a split-second pause. "Don't call the Johnsons," he said quickly, a sharp edge to his tone. "They overcharge, and old man Johnson is probably half senile by now. Look, I have a guy. A friend. His name is Frank Miller. He's the best in the business, does a lot of work on the properties I sell. I'll have him stop by tomorrow morning. Just don't let anyone else touch it, okay?" His insistence set off a tiny alarm bell in the back of my mind, but I was so tired. So tired of fighting, so tired of the tension. "Fine, David," I sighed. "Have your friend call me." Frank Miller arrived at precisely 9 o'clock the next morning. He was not what I expected. I'd pictured someone young and hurried like most of the contractors David dealt with. But Frank was a man in his early 60s, with a sturdy build, kind eyes, and hands that looked like they knew their way around more than just wires. There was a calmness about him, a quiet authority that was immediately reassuring. He carried his toolbox with an easy confidence, and when he shook my hand, his grip was firm and steady. "Mrs. Thompson," he said with a warm smile. "David sent me. Said you were having some trouble with flickering lights. And a humming," I added, leading him into the kitchen. "In this wall right here." He placed a hand against the wallpaper, his head tilted as if he were listening to a secret. Sarah, who had been sulking in the living room, wandered into the kitchen, her arms crossed over her chest. "He's finally here then," she said, not bothering to greet him. "About time. It's like living in a haunted house." Frank nodded politely at her, but I saw his eyes linger on her for a moment longer than necessary. It wasn't a look of interest, but one of assessment, of careful observation. It was the kind of look a man gives when he's sizing up a situation, not just a faulty wire. He spent the next half hour checking the outlets, the switches, the fixtures in every room upstairs. He was methodical, unhurried. He asked me questions not just about the electricity but about my health. "Have you been feeling all right lately, Mrs. Thompson?" he asked as he tightened a loose connection in the hallway. "Dizzy spells? Trouble sleeping?" "A little," I admitted, surprised by the personal question. "The doctor says it's just my age." He just grunted, a non-committal sound, but I saw something flicker in his eyes. A thought, a suspicion. He finished his work upstairs and then stood at the top of the basement stairs. "Well, everything up here seems superficial," he said, his voice loud enough for Sarah to hear from the other room. "The main issue must be originating from the circuit breaker box. I'll need to go down and take a look at the main conduit." He gave me a brief, steady look before he turned and descended into the gloom of the basement. The old wooden steps groaned under his weight. I stood there in the kitchen, a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach, listening to the silence from below. I had no idea that he wasn't just going down there to look at wires. He was walking into the heart of my children's darkness, and he was about to drag their terrible secret into the light. The silence from the basement stretched on for an eternity. I could hear the faint sounds of Frank moving around down there, the scrape of his toolbox on the concrete floor, a soft metallic clink. Sarah had put on the television in the living room, the cheerful, mindless chatter of a morning talk show filling the house, a jarring contrast to the cold dread that was slowly seeping into my bones. What was taking him so long? After what felt like a lifetime, I heard his heavy footsteps on the stairs again. I turned from the sink, wiping my damp hands on my apron, expecting to see him emerge covered in dust, ready to tell me I needed a whole new panel and it was going to cost a fortune. But the man who appeared at the top of the stairs was not the same man who had gone down. His face was ashen. The kindly warmth in his eyes had been replaced by a hard, focused intensity. He walked straight past the basement door, his movements deliberate, and came directly to me in the kitchen. He glanced towards the living room, where Sarah was still engrossed in the TV, and then he looked at me. It was in that moment that he delivered his chilling, life-saving whisper. After the initial shock, after my world tilted on its axis, my first coherent thought was a desperate, grasping denial. "That's insane." I breathed, my voice shaking. "You're mistaken. My children, they wouldn't." Frank put a steadying hand on my arm. His touch was firm, grounding me. "Carol," he said, his voice low and certain. "I was a homicide detective for 25 years before I started this business. I've seen the worst things people can do to each other. I know what a weapon looks like when I see one. And what's in your basement is a weapon. The word hung there, obscene and unbelievable. He saw the disbelief still warring with terror on my face. Come with me, he said. You need to see it for yourself. He led me to the basement door. As he opened it, a wave of damp, earthy air washed over me. Stay quiet, he mouthed. We crept down the stairs, each creak of the old wood sounding like a gunshot in the silence. The basement was my husband's domain, filled with his old tools, fishing gear, and boxes of memories I couldn't bear to sort through. Frank led me to the far wall, behind the hulking furnace. He pointed to a section of newly installed drywall, painted to almost perfectly match the older, crumbling concrete around it. He pulled out a utility knife from his pocket and scored a neat rectangle in the drywall. He pried the section loose and set it carefully on the floor. My breath caught in my throat. There, nestled in the insulation, was a small, sleek metal box, no bigger than a shoebox. A series of tiny red LED lights blinked on its surface in a steady, hypnotic rhythm. Wires snaked out from it, one expertly spliced into the thick, main power cable that fed the entire house, and another bundle of thinner wires that ran straight up, disappearing into the floorboards above us. Directly under my bedroom. What is that? I whispered, a profound, visceral horror washing over me. It's a low-frequency pulse generator, Frank said grimly, keeping his voice low. Military grade or something very similar. It's been calibrated to emit electromagnetic pulses at a specific frequency. A frequency that is known to disrupt human cardiac rhythms and neurological function over time. It's designed to be a slow, untraceable poison. It induces symptoms that mimic natural health decline. Dizziness, heart palpitations, confusion, eventual cardiac arrest. A doctor would never find the cause. They just sign the death certificate and list old age or heart failure. He pointed his flashlight at the meticulous wiring. This wasn't an amateur job. Whoever installed this knew exactly what they were doing. They knew electronics and they knew biology. I felt my knees buckle, and I had to grip a dusty workbench to stay upright. The humming. It wasn't the house. It was this machine. This death machine planted in the heart of my home, slowly, methodically killing me. The realization was a physical agony, a tearing deep inside my soul. Frank put his hand on my shoulder. We need to get you out of here, he said again, his voice like steel. But first, I need you to listen to me. Your life depends on what we do in the next 10 minutes. Are you ready to do exactly as I say? I stared at the blinking red lights, the heartbeat of my children's betrayal, and I knew that my old life had just ended at the bottom of these stairs. All I could do was nod. Okay, Carol. Frank's voice was a steady anchor in my sea of terror. Here's what we do. We go back upstairs. You are going to act completely normal. You are going to go to your bedroom and gather your most essential items. Purse, wallet, driver's license. Any bank statements, checkbooks, or legal documents you can grab quickly. Your medications. That's it. No clothes, no photo albums, nothing that would look suspicious. You have 5 minutes. 5 minutes. 5 minutes to pack up the remnants of my life and flee my own home. My mind was reeling, but the cold, hard logic in his voice cut through the fog of my panic. What do I tell Sarah? I whispered, my eyes still fixed on the sinister blinking box. You tell her you're running to the pharmacy to pick up a prescription. Keep it simple. Keep your voice steady. Don't let her see the fear in your eyes. I'll stay in the kitchen, pretend I'm finishing up writing an invoice. I'll keep her distracted. Now go. He carefully replaced the piece of drywall, concealing the horrifying secret once more. We climbed the stairs, the talk show still blaring from the living room. It felt like walking from a tomb back into a twisted parody of normal life. As I reached the top of the stairs, my heart was pounding so hard I was sure Sarah could hear it from the next room. I walked down the hall, my legs feeling like they were moving through water. Each step was a monumental effort. I passed the gallery of family photos on the wall, David's graduation, Sarah's wedding, a picture of all of us at the Grand Canyon, smiling under a bright blue sky. A wave of nausea washed over me. It was all a lie. A beautiful, carefully constructed lie. In my bedroom, my hands trembled so violently, I could barely turn the key to the small safe, hidden behind a painting of the Ohio countryside. I pulled out a manila envelope containing the deed to the farm, my will, Michael's life insurance papers, and a stack of savings bonds. I shoved them into my large leather handbag. I swept my prescription bottles from my nightstand into the bag, their rattling sounding deafeningly loud in the quiet room. My eyes fell on a small silver-framed photo on my dresser. It was a picture of David and Sarah's children, maybe 5 and 8 years old, sitting on a pony at the county fair. They were laughing, their faces bright with innocent joy, missing teeth and all. Without thinking, I grabbed it and shoved it into my purse. A part of me, the mother in me, needed to remember that they hadn't always been monsters. "Mom!" Sarah's voice floated down the hallway, sharp and questioning. "What are you doing up there? Is everything okay?" I froze, my hand on the doorknob. My throat went dry. I swallowed hard, praying my voice wouldn't betray me. "I'm fine, honey," I called back, forcing a lightness I was nowhere near feeling. "Just getting my purse. I need to run to the pharmacy to pick up my blood pressure medication before they close." There was a pause. "Oh, okay," she said, her tone flat, disinterested. "Do you need me to drive you?" No, I've got it," I said quickly. I could use the air. I took one last look around the room that had been my sanctuary for 50 years. The familiar floral wallpaper, the quilt my grandmother had made, the indentation on the pillow where my husband's head used to rest. It now felt like a prison, a beautifully decorated tomb. I closed the door behind me and walked down the stairs, my handbag feeling as heavy as a block of cement. Frank was in the kitchen, scribbling on a notepad at the table. Sarah glanced up from her phone as I walked towards the front door. Her eyes flickered from my face to my handbag, and for a terrifying second, I thought she could see right through me. I thought she could see the panic, the betrayal, the horrible knowledge I was carrying. But she just gave a little nod and looked back at her screen. I opened the front door, the cool autumn air hitting my face. I didn't let myself run until the door was closed behind me. Frank had told me his truck was parked across the street, a little way down. I walked, forcing myself to maintain a normal pace, down the gravel driveway. Every step was agony. I was convinced that at any moment, the door would fly open and they would come running after me. But it never happened. When I reached the road and risked a glance back, I saw the curtain in the living room window twitch. Sarah was watching me go. A shiver of ice went down my spine and then I ran. The engine of Frank's old Ford truck rumbled to life, a comforting solid sound in a world that had just been torn apart. I scrambled into the passenger seat, my handbag clutched to my chest like a shield, and slammed the door shut. He didn't say a word, just pulled away from the curb and drove, putting distance between me and the house of horrors that had once been my home. My body was trembling uncontrollably, a deep, violent shudder that came from the very core of my being. Tears I didn't even know I was holding back began to stream down my face, hot and silent. I stared out the window at the familiar Ohio landscape blurring past, the cornfields, the red barns, the white farmhouses, but I wasn't really seeing any of it. All I could see were those blinking red lights. "We can't go to the police," Frank said, his voice breaking the silence. His eyes were fixed on the road ahead. "Not yet." "Why not?" I asked, my voice cracking. "They tried to kill me." "I know," he said grimly. "But think about it, Carol. What's our proof? The word of a 72-year-old woman against her 2 loving, concerned children? They'll say you're confused. They'll say you're having a breakdown after your husband's death. They'll show the police the power of attorney papers they tried to get you to sign as proof of your declining mental state. And who am I? The electrician David hired. It'll look like I'm some con artist who spun you a crazy story to get you away from your family. They will turn this whole thing around on us in a heartbeat. We need undeniable, irrefutable proof before we walk into a police station." His logic was cold, sharp, and terrifyingly correct. My children had been laying the groundwork for months, painting me as a confused, forgetful old woman. They had planned for every contingency. Frank drove for about 20 minutes before pulling into the parking lot of a small, roadside diner called the Corner Spoon. It was the kind of place that smelled of old coffee and frying bacon. He led me to a booth in the far back corner, away from the windows, and ordered 2 cups of black coffee. I wrapped my icy hands around the warm ceramic mug, trying to stop them from shaking. It was there, in the quiet anonymity of the diner, that he told me more about himself. He wasn't just an electrician. He'd been a detective with the Columbus Police Department for 25 years, specializing in financial crimes and elder abuse cases. He'd retired a few years back, tired of the bureaucracy and the heartbreak, and had taken up electrical work, his father's trade, to keep his hands and mind busy. "I knew something was wrong the moment I talked to your son on the phone," he said, stirring his coffee. "He was too slick, too insistent that I be the one to come out. And when I saw your daughter today, the way she watched you, I've seen that look before. It's the look of a predator waiting for its prey to weaken." He had seen it. He had recognized the evil that I, their own mother, had been blind to for so long. He laid out the plan. He would have to go back. "They're expecting an invoice, a follow-up," he explained. "It's the perfect cover. I'll tell them I need to run a final diagnostic tomorrow morning. While I'm there, I'll plant a couple of small audio-activated recorders in the kitchen and the living room, and I'll get clear timestamp photos of that device in the basement. That, combined with your testimony and the attempted power of attorney, will be enough." The thought of him going back into that house, back into the lion's den, made me sick with fear. "It's too dangerous," I said. He gave me a small sad smile. "Letting them get away with this is more dangerous. Not just for you but for whoever their next victim might be." He paid for the coffee in cash and drove me to a nondescript motel on the edge of town, the Buckeye Motel. Its neon sign flickered, a picture of a buckeye nut glowing a tired red against the darkening sky. He got me a room at the far end of the building, paid in cash again, and gave me the key. "Lock this door and don't open it for anyone but me," he instructed, his face serious. "Don't answer the room phone. If your children call your cell, answer it but keep it short. Tell them you decided to visit an old friend for the night. Don't tell them where you are. I'll be back tomorrow as soon as I have what we need." I nodded, unable to speak. He gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze and then he was gone. I stepped inside the cold, impersonal room, which smelled faintly of stale smoke and bleach. I locked the deadbolt and slid the chain into place. I was safe for now. But as I sank onto the lumpy bed, clutching my handbag, I had never felt more alone or more terrified in my entire life. The night in that motel room was the longest of my life. Every creak of the building, every car that pulled into the parking lot, sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through me. I didn't sleep. I just sat in the dark watching the headlights sweep across the cheap curtains, my mind replaying the day's events over and over. The trust one had placed in my children had been the foundation of my life, and now that foundation had crumbled into dust, leaving me in a free fall. Morning finally came, gray and cheerless. I spent the hours pacing the small room, waiting for a call from Frank. My own cell phone remained silent, which was almost more unnerving than if they had been calling. What were they thinking? Did they know I was gone for good? Or did they believe my lie about visiting a friend? Around 10 o'clock my phone finally rang, but it wasn't Frank. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen, then answered, my heart pounding. "Is this Carol Thompson?" A professional-sounding female voice asked. "Yes, who is this?" "Ma'am, my name is Brenda, and I'm a personal banker at the Ohio Central Bank in Columbus. I'm calling because we just received a rather unusual request on your account, and our protocol requires direct voice verification." My blood turned to ice. "What kind of request?" "Well," Brenda said, lowering her voice slightly, "a woman called about 15 minutes ago, identifying herself as you. She requested that we put an immediate freeze on all your accounts, checking, savings, everything. She claimed your purse and all your cards had been stolen, and you were concerned about fraudulent activity. The thing is, ma'am," the voice on the phone sounded significantly younger than the age listed on your file, "I thought it was best to call you directly at the number we have on record before taking any action." I had to sit down on the edge of the bed, my legs suddenly unable to support me. They were trying to cut me off. They knew I had my bank cards, my checkbook. They were trying to strand me, to make me helpless, to force me back to them by leaving me with nothing. It was a move of such calculated cruelty it took my breath away. "Brenda," I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of gratitude and fury. "Thank you. Thank you so much for calling me. Do not, under any circumstances, freeze my accounts. That was not me who called. That was a fraudulent attempt to access my finances. Can you please make a formal note of this incident on my account, including the time of the call?" Of course, Mrs. Thompson, she replied, her tone now serious. I'll document everything. Is there anything else I can do? Should I contact the authorities? Not yet, I said. But you may be hearing from them soon. Thank you again, Brenda. You may have just saved me. I hung up the phone, my mind reeling. This was an escalation. A desperate, aggressive move. They were getting nervous. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with an incoming text. It was from Sarah. Mom, where are you? I'm getting worried. Please call me. Seconds later, another one from David. Mom, your friend Mary called the house looking for you. She said she hasn't heard from you. What's going on? We're worried sick. Please come home. We can take care of you. The lies. The sickening, cloying lies. They were trying to build their narrative, creating a web of deception to trap me in. I felt a surge of white-hot anger. They weren't just trying to kill me. They were trying to erase me, to paint me as a crazy old woman who had wandered off in a state of confusion. I was in the middle of typing a non-committal reply when another text came through. This one was from a number I didn't recognize. My fingers froze as I read the words on the screen. We know you're at the Buckeye Motel, room 112. Stop running, Mom. Let's end this peacefully. My phone slipped from my numb fingers and clattered onto the cheap carpet. I scrambled to my feet and rushed to the window, peering through a tiny gap in the curtains. My heart stopped. Turning slowly into the motel parking lot was David's familiar silver SUV. They had found me. How had they found me? Had they put a tracker on my car? In my purse? It didn't matter. They were here. The hunt was over. I backed away from the window, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my back hitting the cold wall. The room, which had been my refuge, suddenly felt like a cage. And the hunters were right outside the door. The sound of my own frantic breathing filled the small, stale motel room. I was trapped. My mind raced, searching for an escape, but all I could see was David's SUV pulling into a parking spot directly in front of my room. The engine cut off, plunging the parking lot into an eerie silence. For a long moment, nothing happened. They were just sitting in the car, watching my door, waiting. Then my phone buzzed, a violent, jarring sound against the wooden nightstand. It was Frank. I snatched it up, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it again. Carol, don't open that door. His voice was low and urgent. No preamble, no greeting. They're there, aren't they? Yes, I whimpered, my eyes glued to the window. How did you know? How did they find me? I've been back at the house, he said, his words coming fast. I got what we need. More than what we need. I planted the bugs, Carol, and I got pictures of the device. But I stayed, listened in for a bit from my truck down the road. They know you're gone. Sarah saw you run. They're panicking. The doors of the SUV opened. David got out from the driver's side, Linda from the passenger side. They stood there, silhouetted against the setting sun, two dark figures of menace. There's more, Frank continued, his voice tight with anger. The recorder in the kitchen picked up a conversation between David and Linda after they realized you'd bolted. David is in deep, Carol. Gambling debts. He owes some very dangerous people a lot of money. The sale of your farm was supposed to be his salvation. Linda, she's the one pushing him. She was furious you got away. I heard her say, and I quote, "We have to end this tonight, David. No more slow burn. We find her, and we finish it." My stomach churned. Linda. I had always known there was something venomous behind her sweet smile. They talked about the device, Frank, I whispered. What did they say? They were arguing. David was afraid you'd go to the police. Linda said you wouldn't, not yet. She said they had one last resort. They have another device, a portable one. And they were talking about ramping up the frequency. A direct high-powered pulse. It would look like a massive, instantaneous heart attack or stroke. No warning. No chance of survival. A soft, polite knock sounded at the door of my room. My heart leaped into my throat. Mom! It was Sarah's voice, sweet and coaxing. Mom, please open the door. We know you're in there. We're worried about you. Let us take you home. They were using her as bait. The gentle daughter, the one they thought I would trust. Frank, they're here. I breathed into the phone, backing away from the door until I hit the far wall. They're knocking. I know. I'm on my way. I'm 5 minutes out and I've already called it in, he said, his voice a blade of calm in my storm of terror. "The local sheriff's department is dispatching units right now. You just have to hold on. Don't let them in." Another knock, louder this time, more insistent. "Mom, stop being difficult. Open the door." David's voice, no longer hiding his irritation. I looked around the room, a cornered animal searching for an escape. The door was a solid wall of wood, but how long would it hold? The window was a single pane of glass looking out onto the parking lot where they stood waiting. "There's no way out," I sobbed quietly. "Yes, there is." Frank's voice cut in, sharp and commanding. "The bathroom, Carol. Every one of these cheap motels has a small window in the bathroom. It's high up, but you can climb on the toilet. It will lead out to the back of the building. Go now, Carol. Don't think, just go." The handle of the motel room door began to jiggle violently. A key card slid into the slot, then a beep, then a click. They had gotten a key from the front desk. The chain was the only thing holding the door now. I didn't hesitate. I dropped the phone and scrambled into the tiny, cold bathroom, slamming and locking the door behind me just as the main door to the room crashed open against the chain. The flimsy bathroom door shuddered as a heavy weight slammed against it from the other side. "Mom! Open this door right now." David's voice was a furious roar, all pretense of concern gone. I didn't waste a second. I scrambled onto the closed toilet seat, my heart hammering against my ribs. Just as Frank had said, there was a small frosted glass window high up on the wall. My hands, clumsy with fear, fumbled with the rusted latch. For one terrifying moment it wouldn't budge. I put all my weight into it, and with a painful screech of metal on metal it gave way. I pushed the window open. It was a tight squeeze, but I was fueled by pure adrenaline. I hoisted myself up, scraping my knee on the rough window frame, and tumbled out, landing in a heap on the damp, overgrown grass behind the motel. The night air was cold and sharp against my flushed skin. I didn't look back. I just ran. I ran through the darkness, stumbling over unseen roots and rocks, the sound of my own ragged breaths loud in my ears. The back of the motel was a desolate stretch of gravel and weeds, bordered by a dark line of trees. Where was Frank? Had I misunderstood? Then, at the far end of the parking lot, I saw it. The brief, double flash of headlights. It was him. Hope surged through me, giving my tired legs a fresh burst of strength. I sprinted across the gravel, my shoes crunching loudly. The back passenger door of Frank's truck swung open as I approached. I dove inside, landing awkwardly on the seat, and slammed the door shut behind me. "Go!" I screamed, breathless. The tires squealed on the pavement as Frank stomped on the gas pedal. The truck lurched forward, throwing me back against the seat. We shot out of the motel's side exit and onto the dark two-lane highway. For a moment I thought we had made it. I risked a glance out the back window and my heart sank. The silver SUV had burst out of the main entrance, its headlights glaring like the eyes of a predator, and it was coming after us. "They're behind us," I said, my voice trembling. "I see them," Frank said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Hang on." He pressed the accelerator to the floor. The old truck roared in protest, but it picked up speed, hurtling down the empty country road. But David's SUV was newer, more powerful. It closed the distance with terrifying speed until it was right on our bumper. A sickening crunch echoed through the cab as he rammed us from behind. The truck fishtailed wildly, and Frank wrestled with the wheel to keep us on the road. "He's trying to spin us out," Frank grunted, his eyes darting between the road ahead and the rearview mirror. Again David hit us, harder this time. My head snapped back, hitting the headrest. Through the back window, I could see their faces illuminated by the dashboard lights. David was a man possessed, his face contorted in a mask of pure rage. Linda was beside him, screaming into her phone, while Sarah was huddled in the back seat, a pale, terrified ghost. The road ahead curved sharply. "This is our chance," Frank muttered. He expertly downshifted, taking the curve at a speed that felt reckless, the tires screaming in protest. For a second we gained some distance. But the SUV took the curve with ease, its superior handling eating up the asphalt. They pulled up alongside us. I could see David's face clearly now, just a few feet away. He was shouting something I couldn't hear over the roar of the engines. He jerked the wheel, trying to force us off the road and into the dark ditch that ran alongside it. Frank swerved to counter him, Our two vehicles locked in a deadly dance on the narrow highway. It felt like time was slowing down, every second stretching into an eternity. This was it. This was how it was going to end. Then through the darkness ahead, a new light appeared. A piercing, flashing light. Red and blue cutting through the night. A police siren suddenly split the air. Frank hadn't been lying. They were here. Hope, fierce and desperate, surged through me once more. But David saw the lights too. His face twisted in a snarl of frustration, and he made one last, desperate move, yanking the wheel hard towards us. The world became a chaotic blur of screeching tires and shattering glass. David's SUV slammed into our passenger side with a deafening crunch of metal. Our truck was lifted, thrown sideways, and for a terrifying, weightless moment, I was sure we were going to roll. But Frank was a rock. He held the wheel steady, fighting the momentum, and our truck skidded to a halt in the middle of the road, sideways, with its headlights cutting a swath across a dark cornfield. Ahead of us, the police cruiser had blocked the road. Behind us, another one roared up, its siren wailing, cutting off any chance of escape for David. The high-intensity spotlights from both cars flooded the scene with a harsh, artificial daylight. For a moment there was a stunned silence, broken only by the ticking of our cooling engine and my own ragged breaths. Then a voice boomed through a megaphone. "Step out of the vehicle with your hands in the air." The doors to the SUV were thrown open. Linda was the first one out, her carefully crafted composure shattered. "This is a misunderstanding, officer," she shrieked, her voice shrill with panic. "My mother-in-law, she's not well. She's delusional. This man," she pointed a trembling, manicured finger at Frank's truck, "he kidnapped her." Sarah stumbled out after her, looking pale and lost. David emerged last, his face a thunderous mask of fury. He saw me through the windshield, and his eyes burned with a hatred so pure it made me flinch. Frank calmly opened his door and stepped out, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "She's safe in here, officers," he called out. "The victim is with me." My own door was crumpled from the impact, but I shoved it open with all my strength. I had to get out. I had to face them. I climbed out of the truck, my legs shaking so badly I had to lean against the fender for support. The flashing lights were dizzying. "I am not delusional," I said, my voice carrying across the silent stretch of road. It wasn't loud, but it was clear and steady, forged in the fire of their betrayal. And I was not kidnapped. I looked directly at my children, at the son I had nursed through fevers, at the daughter whose hair I had braided. "You tried to kill me," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Sarah flinched as if I had struck her, a flicker of something, shame perhaps, crossing her face before it vanished. But David and Linda were unmoved. "She's crazy," David spat, glaring at the lead officer, a stern-faced sheriff who was calmly assessing the scene. "She's been making up stories for months." "Is that so?" the sheriff said, his voice a low drawl. "Well, my deputy is on his way to your farmhouse right now with a warrant, acting on information provided by Mr. Miller here. And Mr. Miller also forwarded me some very interesting audio files. We also have a recording of your call to your mother's bank this morning, Linda." Linda's face went white. The sheriff then turned his attention to another officer who was approaching from David's SUV, holding a small evidence bag. Inside was a metal box, identical to the one in my basement. "Found this under the passenger seat, Sheriff," the officer said. "Along with this." He held up another bag. Inside was a spiral notebook. The sheriff took the notebook and flipped it open, shining his flashlight on the pages. Even from a distance I could see the neat columns of numbers, the technical drawings, the dates. "Looks like a diary of some kind," the sheriff said, his voice laced with cold fury. "Entries detailing voltage levels, pulse durations, and notes on a subject's declining health. Heart palpitations on the 15th. Dizziness and confusion on the 23rd. Subject appears to be weakening as planned." It was over. The cold, hard proof of their monstrous plan was laid bare under the police lights. The officers moved, and then, as they put the handcuffs on David, his eyes met mine one last time. There was no remorse, no regret. Only a cold, bottomless contempt. Sarah began to sob, a pathetic, theatrical sound. But it was Linda who spoke. As an officer led her past me, she stopped and turned, her face twisted into an ugly sneer. "You old bitch," she hissed, her voice low and full of venom. "You ruin everything." And in that moment, staring into her dead eyes, I finally understood. The children I had loved, the family I had cherished, they were gone. They had been gone for a long, long time. Standing on that dark Ohio road, surrounded by the wreckage of my life, all I felt was a vast, empty silence. The 6 months that followed were a blur of legal proceedings, depositions, and courtroom drama. It was the hardest thing I have ever had to do. Sitting in that cold, sterile room, listening to lawyers try to twist the truth, trying to paint me as the villain in my own story. They dragged my grief over Michael's death through the mud, claiming it had unhinged me. They used Sarah's recent divorce as a way to portray her as a vulnerable daughter, easily manipulated. They tried to frame David as a desperate son, crushed by gambling debts from a college fund that never materialized, trying to protect the family assets. But their lies couldn't stand against the mountain of evidence Frank had gathered. The audio recordings were damning. The jury listened in horrified silence to Linda's cold, methodical planning, to David's angry outbursts, to their casual discussion of my impending death. Frank's photographs of the device in the basement were displayed on a large screen for the whole court to see. The notebook, which the prosecution called the murder log, sealed their fate. David sat there day after day in his ill-fitting suit, refusing to look at me, his face a blank wall of denial. Linda tried to cry, but her tears were as fake as her smiles had been. Sarah just seemed to shrink, becoming smaller and smaller in the witness box until she was nothing but a ghost. When the verdict finally came in, the courtroom was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Guilty. On all counts. Attempted murder, conspiracy, elder abuse. The judge, a woman with kind but firm eyes, looked at them with utter disdain. David and Linda were each sentenced to 20 years in a state penitentiary, with no possibility of parole for 15. Sarah, for her role as an accomplice, received 12 years. I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumph. I just felt empty. The chapter of my life that included them was over, closed not with a gentle fade, but with the slam of a prison door. I couldn't go back to the farmhouse. Every floorboard seemed to whisper their betrayal. Every room held a memory now tainted with poison. The humming was gone, but I could still feel it in my bones. With Frank's help, I sold the farm, the land, everything. I packed only what truly mattered. My photos of Michael, my grandmother's quilt, my paints and easel. Frank suggested I move somewhere with fresh air, somewhere with a wide-open view. He helped me find a small, bright apartment in a quiet town on the shores of Lake Erie. From my living room window, I can see the water stretch out to the horizon, its colors changing with the light, from a soft gray at dawn to a brilliant blue at noon, to a fiery orange at sunset. The air here is clean and the days are peaceful. I've started painting again, something I hadn't had the heart to do since Michael died. I paint the lake, the gulls circling in the sky, the old lighthouses standing guard on the shore. The colors on the canvas remind me that life, even after being shattered, can be put back together again. Maybe not the same as before, but still beautiful in its own way. Frank drives up to visit on some weekends. He's not just the man who saved my life. He's become my dearest friend. We sit on my small balcony, drinking tea and watching the sailboats glide by. We don't talk about that night or the trial. We don't need to. We talk about books and gardening and the best place to get fish and chips. But sometimes our eyes will meet, and there's a quiet understanding that passes between us. We both know how close I came to vanishing, and how the courage and intuition of one good man changed everything. I know some people listening to my story might find it hard to believe. A mother's love is supposed to be sacred, a child's devotion unconditional. But I am living proof that sometimes the darkest evil hides behind the most familiar faces. I learned in the most painful way possible that family is not about blood. It's about who makes you feel safe. It's about who protects you, who honors you, who would never, ever make you afraid to breathe in your own home. Every night before I go to sleep, I stand by my window and look out at the dark water. The only humming I hear now is the gentle song of the wind coming off the lake. It no longer sounds like a threat. Sounds like freedom. It's the echo of a truth I learned too late, but one I will live by for the rest of my days. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to tell, but I believe that sharing our experiences, even the most painful ones, is how we begin to heal and help others. I have to wonder, have you ever had a gut feeling about someone? A chilling intuition that turned out to be true? Let me know in the comments below. Your story matters. And if my story resonated with you, please consider giving it a like and subscribe for more true stories about survival and finding strength in the darkest of times.